One of the worst mistakes I ever made in real estate was buying a package of houses. And as a matter of fact, this house right behind me was one of those houses. This is 9046 Place. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take you around, I'm gonna show you some other houses in the area that were a part of that package, and then I'm gonna explain why it was a huge mistake. Let's go. All right, so this is one of the houses I bought as a part of that package. I'm on Cotton Avenue. All right, so this is another house. This is on Waco Avenue. These are two houses I owned. We got 1224 and 1228. They were side by side. Two other houses that I bought. This one is in really rough shape, and if you look across the street, the other one is actually a vacant lot. Now, somebody bought it from me, and then the city bulldozed it. Now, let's go back and just talk about why I think buying this package was a massive mistake. The way you make money in real estate is to buy at a deep, deep discount. And that's exactly what I did with these properties. I paid $100,000 for all 10 of these properties. And, the ARV of these homes, the after repair value, was probably back in the day when I bought these, probably around $60,000 or $70,000. And they were producing $500 to $550 a month in rent. Now, before you think that's crazy, just know this is in the South. I'm currently in the South. So you can find really, really deeply discounted properties in the South and usually in the Midwest. But that's not the point. The point is, on paper, it really looked like a great deal, but it wasn't. And I'm going to walk you through the 5 huge mistakes that I made buying this package of properties. And really, it doesn't even matter if you're buying one property, 2, 10, 20, 30, it doesn't matter. You can apply these mistakes to your own purchasing decisions so that you don't make the same mistakes I made. So I'm going to walk through all 5 of them, and number 5 is probably the biggest mistake I ever made. All right, mistake number 1 is buying these properties sight unseen. Now, it sounds crazy that you would just buy them sight unseen. I probably drove by 4 or 5 of them. Some of them were pretty close together. But the thing is, when you're buying a package of houses, especially at such a deep discount, you get really excited about the number, and just driving by the outside, they were all occupied. And so therefore I wasn't going inside the properties. I didn't want to disturb the resident. The seller didn't want me to disturb the resident, and I didn't want to disturb the resident. So that is a huge mistake. When you go in and you're buying properties, especially bulk properties in low to moderate income areas, and you're doing it sight unseen, you're setting yourself up for big problems. If you're not inspecting the properties, going in, finding out what kind of deferred maintenance they have, if you're not finding out what the situation with the resident is, how they're living, how they're taking care of the property, if you're not walking the property, I would even send an inspector out to take a look at the property. You're making a huge mistake. And so that was a big one that I made, is just buying these properties sight unseen. I mean, the price was so good for $10,000 each. I mean, really, I was thinking, what could go wrong? I knew that I could probably offload a few of those, and if there were problems, I could offload them, and it wouldn't be a big deal. But big mistake. That's number 1. Whatever you do, don't do that. All right, mistake number 2. Now, this is a big one that I see a lot of investors make, and I made this one obviously with this package, but it's buying old houses. I just looked up how old some of these houses were. The one on Waco Avenue was built in 1925. The one on Cotton Avenue was built in 1930. And so when you're buying houses that are over 100 years old or 100 years old, you're asking for a lot of problems, mainly with repairs and maintenance. So the ongoing repairs and maintenance for these properties are going to start just like pouring in. The more a resident lives there, the more problems the house is going to have. You're going to have to turn that property. They're just old houses, and with those old houses come problems with plumbing, electrical situation in the home. It's kind of sketchy, and it for sure was on these properties. So buying old houses is really not a great way. Even if you're getting them at a deep discount, you're going to end up spending more in maintenance than you thought you were. So that was big mistake number 2. Okay, mistake number 3 was really just buying. I thought, hey, I'm in the west end of town. I'll just buy these properties. It wasn't that big of a deal. But honestly, some of these properties were in some sketchy areas, high crime areas. And if you're not a seasoned real estate investor in some of these low to moderate income areas, you're going to want to have boots on the ground. You're going to want to understand, what does the street scene look like? What does the block look like? Because I can promise you, not even, 100 yards away, it completely changes. And so driving from 1 mile down the road, you never know what's going to happen. And so some of these houses were on decent streets and looked pretty okay. And then some of them were in some rough areas. And so when you do that, when you're buying houses, especially packages, you need to know where you're buying, because I can promise you, one of them, as a matter of fact, Cotton Avenue, it's this house. And if you were just like looking at it on Google, you'd be like, okay, there's a house, it's fine, even though it's old. But what you don't see, and why you need to have boots on the ground, and I should have really been more careful in where I was buying, there were 2 multifamilies on either side of this single family property. And so you can imagine, if you're trying to rent this property and somebody's coming to look at it, and you have 2 multifamilies side by side, right sandwiched in between, and you have people walking all around, no great resident is going to want to rent that property. And so that was a big mistake I made. It's just, some of them were not in great areas. You need to know the area. You need to know what you're doing when you're buying these and exactly where they are. So that would be mistake number 3. Okay, mistake number 4 now. This is a big one, and this shows you what kind of real estate investor I was back in the day. This was early on in my career. These were the first rentals I bought. I was really just a gunslinger. I had been wholesaling houses, and I was doing deals, and it was fun and it was a good time in the market. And so when I decided to really buy a package of rental houses, I was just kind of rolling the dice. And I was so excited about getting 10 houses for $100,000 that when the seller didn't have all the documentation, I was still okay with it. He didn't have all the leases. He didn't have all of the security deposits for the leases that he did have. He didn't have keys to all the properties. He didn't really even know who was up to date and who wasn't. This person who was selling these, he had owned them for a very long time. He was an older gentleman, and he was ready to be done. So he was definitely a motivated seller. He was just trying to get out of them. He's probably tired of the hassle. He was more than likely managing them himself. And so I let all of this slide. That's the crazy thing. I'm the one, it was my fault. It was my mistake. I went to the closing table and I signed all the documents, and I knew that he didn't have all the leases. I knew he didn't have all of the security deposits and the keys and the rent roll and all of the stuff that I should have insisted on. Shouldn't have done the deal if he didn't have all this information. But I remember closing the deal, talking to him, and he was like, listen, I'm going to go try to find some of the leases or whatever. And I was like, okay, great. If you don't have them, I'll go get a new lease signed. I mean, I was super green when it came to rental property. And I pulled up to the very first house because I hadn't received rent for the very first time I went out to one of the properties as the new landlord. And I was going to serve an eviction notice. And I pulled up and I had a flashback today because I was at the same house, and I looked on the front porch and there were 2 huge pit bulls chained up to the front porch. And I was going to go serve an eviction notice. Well, that wasn't happening. So I got back in my car and left, and I was like, man, I don't even have a lease. I don't have anything. And big mistake. It took me a bit to unwind all this stuff and really figure out what was what, who was paying, who wasn't paying, and set everything straight. So I could have saved myself a lot of time and a lot of headache if I had gotten all that documentation up front. So that's mistake number 4. All right, this is it. This is mistake number 5, and this is the biggest one. And I have seen investors over my past 20 years in real estate, either owning rentals, managing rentals, or selling houses. I have seen investors make this mistake time and time again. So what happens is they get excited about a deal, and they get excited that the property already has a resident in it. They get really excited that there's somebody already paying rent. And so they're counting in their head, oh, I've got all this money coming in, and it looks great on paper. However, what they don't do is they are not considering the fact that this property has tremendous amounts of deferred maintenance. Now, this is the biggest deal because I'm telling you, As soon as I bought those properties, there were people who were ready to move out. Not the same day, but within 6 months. And so on paper, what I had done is said, hey, I'm going to have this income. The income that I was collecting, I was going to have this for the next 12 months. People were ready to move. Some people stopped paying, had to get them out. And so what happened is I had vacancy. And what do you do when you have vacancy? You've got to fill that vacancy as quickly as possible. And so I remember going out to these properties and going, holy smokes, I wasn't expecting this much repair to be done on these houses. Like I had to come out of pocket out of a lot of cash. I remember the first roof I put on a house. I was thinking, my goodness gracious, back in the day, this was a $7,000 roof. It had to have a ton of shingles torn off. It had already had several layers of a roof. It was getting too heavy. So it was a big, big ordeal. And this is something I see that happens to investors all the time when they're buying these low to moderate income homes in the Midwest and the Southeast, and they think they're getting a fantastic deal. And then all of a sudden they've got all this deferred maintenance and they have to front end load all this expense and then hope that over the next 2 or 3 years, they can recoup it, or 2 to 3 years, they keep a good resident and they keep paying them. They can't afford to have another turn. And so it becomes a massive headache, a massive problem. And that's what happened with me. What I ended up doing was I ended up selling a few of these houses for more than the $10,000 I had in each one of them. I just sold for more, and I was using that money to repair some of those houses. So it wasn't going according to plan. And ultimately, slowly, I started to sell some of these properties, and I think I ended up with probably maybe 4 or 5 of those houses that I kept long term, but the others I sold. But that's probably the biggest mistake, is just not paying attention to deferred maintenance. Again, I mentioned it before. Make sure you have an inspector go out there and look at that property, because it's a big deal. So that's it. That's mistake number 5 that I made, probably the worst one. Now, here's a tip. If you find yourself already in this situation, or for some reason you go ahead and buy a package or buy a house and you find yourself like, wow, this is going to be tight. I don't think I'm going to make my money back. I just don't know if it's going to work out. So here's something that I recommend that you could do. Instead of renting it long-term, I've seen investors do this. I've actually done this before, is you can do a rent to own. And so what this is you will collect a down payment, you'll put it towards the purchase price, but essentially you're giving somebody the opportunity to own that property. It's still a rental, but you're going to apply the down payment plus a certain percentage of the monthly rent towards the purchase of that property. And usually a resident may have 24 months or 36 months to then buy the property, refinance you out, get a traditional loan and get you out. So that's one way. Another way is you could do owner financing. You could just have somebody buy it, you hold the note. I've known several people who have done that. And then the third thing is you could just try to sell it on the retail market. That's going to be a long shot, especially if it's in low to moderate income area. And that may not work for everybody, especially if you have to put a lot of money into it to fix it up. But just a few tips in case you find yourself in this situation. And if you want to see the 10 mistakes that I see new real estate investors make that cost them tens of thousands of dollars so that you don't make the same mistakes, go ahead and watch this video right here.